So today we're going over my DSLR, aka mirrorless film scanning setup. So welcome back everybody. If you're new, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe. If you are not, it helps a lot. Today we're going to be going over all the things I use for my film scanning setup. Obviously, DSLR film scanning is nothing new. People have been doing it for a while. But there's a lot of different ways in which you can do it now. Some are more affordable than others, and some are going to be more accurate than others as well. So I'm going to go over what I use now, what I used to use, some things that you can use if you're trying to save money, as well as some things you can do if you have some extra money to spend. Be sure to check out my website in the description. I still have a bunch of cameras, lenses, etc. that are on sale. I still have a bunch more that I have to upload as well. Also, you can see the affiliate links in the description as well, stuff that I use on the regular, whether it be cameras, films, etc. Again, those are affiliates, so those do help me make these videos, but I wouldn't put them down there if I didn't use them. So we'll start with the camera, start with the things there, then we'll get into the extra accessories, lighting, film slides, all that kind of stuff that you need to kind of do this on your own. Now we're using a mirrorless camera because we want good high quality results. You can do this with your phone. There's a dozen or more different apps that you could download and scan your negatives that way. I do not recommend that way if you want good results, because there's so many different variables that can happen. Not to mention you're using a sensor that's like that big. So once you take those images off of your phone, the quality is not going to be good, to say the least. So it's great if you need something quick and you're in a pinch, but I don't recommend doing that long term. So first, I'm using my Fuji X-T2 for all my mirrorless scanning. It is not full frame, it is APS-C, but that's fine. Again, this is still going to get me much better results than a lot of lab scanners, especially if you're just paying for the basic scans. Not to mention, I'm getting a raw file with this, so I have much more control and flexibility when it comes to editing my photo to make sure I get it exactly how I want to. I do have the X-T4 as well. Of course, those are the main cameras that I use. For this, the X-T2 is going to be fine. It's mainly video that separates those cameras. So any mirrorless or DSLR camera is going to be just fine. As long as you have control of your settings, you can get raw images and things like that. So next up is another important piece, a macro lens. Now this example, I'm using a vintage Nikkor 50mm, is it 50mm? 55mm 3.5 macro lens. Normally I have a vintage Nikkor 100mm macro, which is the main lens that I use, but there's some things that have fallen into the inner elements, so I'm getting some specs on my scans. So until I clean that up, I'm going back to this 50mm. The reason, of course, you want to use a macro lens is so you can get very close to the negative, and the reason you want to use a more telephoto macro lens as opposed to something like a 50 is so you get better compression and you get a flatter image. Similar to in a way of how shooting a 14mm lens kind of rounds things out, and shooting a 85 or 135mm kind of flattens things and brings your background closer to the foreground. Since we're taking a physical picture of this and not putting it on a flatbed scanner, we want to make sure that image is as flat as possible and we don't get any kind of warp or distortion. Obviously, we're not really going to get that using a 50mm macro lens versus like a 100mm, but it is ideal to use a longer macro lens. In addition to that, I have it on a dummy adapter for the Fuji X-T2, which makes this 50 more like an 85mm lens. Sticking with the camera setup, next I have a bubble level. This just mounts right into the X-T2. It's great because I have this little bubble on top. I can make sure that it's completely level. That is important because, again, you want to make sure that your scan is accurate, and if your camera isn't level, the negative when it scans it might be off as well. So half your image might be in focus, the other half might not be, or you might have the center in focus and the front and the back are out of focus. This actually just came in a lot of cameras that I bought, so it was rather convenient because I didn't have to go buy one. Before this, I was just using a regular level you would get at the hardware store and literally setting it on top of the back of this camera and making sure that it was level on each side. That's how I started, and that is not something I am proud of, but it worked. I made sure my camera was level and it got me better results. So if you need something very budget friendly, that technically is an option. Now, how are you going to mount your camera? There's obviously a few different ways that you can do this. A lot of people use old photo enlargers and kind of use that stand to mount it. Some people use old projector stands and mount their camera there. I've seen wall mounts, anything like that. The most common and cost-effective use is just a simple tripod with a ball mount or some other type of head. This is what I have been using. This is just a simple tripod. I replaced the ball head with, yet again, another piece that I acquired in a camera lot. This is a 3-point adjustable tripod head, so I can unscrew and kind of adjust each side as needed, and this is much more accurate to me than using a ball head. since when you tighten a ball head, it can adjust slightly and kind of mess up whatever set position you had it on. This is much easier for me to pinpoint the accuracy of it. Also, in addition to that, this tripod has a 90-degree arm. So if I just extend that out, I can turn it, rotate it, and then just like that, I have a 90-degree arm on this tripod, which makes it much better for film scanning. Downside to this is, of course, if you don't have a dedicated tripod, every time you set this up, you have to readjust your settings and make sure that it's straight, make sure you're the right distance from your film, make sure that it's level, all that stuff. And of course, it can wobble or sway a little bit if you have too much weight on it, you have it too extended, or if you kick the leg, anything like that, it can all throw your settings off. So companies like Negative Supply have dedicated stands for mounting cameras for DSLR scanning your film. What I plan on switching to though is I just have this little baby pin here, sort of / wall mount with a 1/4 thread on it. So what I plan to do is either take this and mount it to this back wall here somewhere, just to kind of save space so I'm not constantly bringing out a tripod. I don't have to bring in a completely separate stand to mount my camera. I can just pop this on the back wall, or maybe I'll mount some 2x4 on this table or something. That actually works out perfect. I can still make sure that it's level. As long as it's level against the wall there, I can have that set right up there and then just scan my film that way. It's going to be sturdier. I don't have to worry about it shaking or anything like that. And it's just going to have a much smaller footprint, which is what I want. These are just a couple bucks on Amazon. I'll try and remember to put the link down below. I think you can get them for like $5-10 bucks on Amazon. It is just important to make sure that whenever you mount this, it is level. Another option is just, of course, to put this on the wall and then either put a tripod head or a ball head onto that 1/4 and use that instead of using this directly onto the wall, which is probably a little bit of a safer bet. That way, if this pulls out of the wall or anything like that, you're not going to have to re-screw it in somewhere else or do some other kind of wonky adjustments to make sure that your image is level. Now for light, there's a lot of options when it comes to light. I've seen where people use their cell phones. I've seen where people use their laptops. I don't recommend laptops just because there's no way to get it level. Phones, yes, you can get them level, but you can't get a lot of light out of them. So you're limiting yourself again there when it comes to your camera settings. The best option is to get some sort of light pad. Currently, I'm using the LightPad 920LX by Artograph. I got this off of Amazon. This was not one of the cheaper options. I think this was $70 or $80, I think, but it's been a great investment. I use it all the time. It's been reliable. Had no issues with it. Had it for several years. It is scratch proof, so I don't really have a lot of scratches on here. Okay, that part might not be accurate, but it gets bright. It's very reliable. You can adjust the settings with the power button. It's got an on-off switch. Simply just plugs right into the wall through there. I've had no issues and I have nothing but good things to say about this. Now, I did have a cheaper option off of Amazon that I spent 20 bucks for or something. The issue with that is you could see the individual LEDs. So when you have to drop your exposure on the camera, then you're doing a longer exposure, you get hot spots in your negative. And so I was looking at my negative and I could see a bunch of hot spots throughout it, a bunch of dots. So it was really just taking away from the image and distracting, and it looked like I just shot with expired film or didn't know what I was doing or had some other kind of problems. So make sure you're careful when it comes to getting the cheaper option because you might end up paying for it in the long run. But if you bump up your ISO and crank up your shutter speed as well, you might be able to get away with using a cheaper pad and not have to worry about those hotspots. Another important accessory is a cable release. So I use this all the time. I plug it straight into the Fuji. That way I'm not physically touching the camera when I take a picture of each negative because I don't want any shake, especially when using low shutter speeds and a macro lens. It'll get blurry, out of focus. You'll get, all that kind of stuff. Alternatively, a lot of cameras have phone apps that you can do it with. I can do that with the Fuji, but it's not as reliable. It tends to be kind of annoying and kind of cut in and out sometimes. And so if I'm scanning a lot of film, I don't want to constantly be having to go onto the Wi-Fi, connect it to the camera, set it all up, and then start taking pictures again. I'd rather just use a cable release and just get it done with. If you don't have either of those options, you can put your camera on a timer. Mine has 2 seconds and 10 seconds, so if I wanted to, I could press the shutter and let it wait 2 seconds or 10, and it would take a picture. Problem again there is if you're pressing the shutter and it doesn't steady out within 2 seconds, first of all, you probably need to adjust your setup. But then secondly, again, your image is going to be blurry. So next, one of the more important parts is how do you keep your film flat? For my 35mm, I've been using this. I also got this just off Amazon. I think this is just a couple of bucks. It's relatively cheap, but it just pops right open. So I cut sections of 6, put it in here, close it up, lock it, set it onto the light pad, and that's how I took my negative. Some downsides to this. First of all, it's got brackets in between each negative. So if you're shooting a panoramic camera, or maybe you're shooting it on a medium format camera to get that panoramic look, it's not quite going to work with these in here. But of course that does keep it flat to make sure your image comes out clean. Also, cutting 6 negatives for everything on a roll of 36 gets a bit annoying, and then kind of sitting it in here and make sure it's set right and adjusted also can be a pain. On top of that, now you're taking this out and putting it back in every time you have to take 6 new images. So you're constantly realigning this under the camera, and then of course your crops are going to be different on every single image. So this is cheap, but it sometimes can create a lot more work. For 120 film scanning, I've been using this by Lomography. This is the Digitalizer by Lomography. A very hip name. Upsides to this is I don't have those lines in between, so if I have a 6x7, 6x6, 6x9, all that can fit right in there. This is nice because it's magnetic, so you can put your slides in there and then close it up, and it's going to make sure that it's nice and tight so you don't get any warps or bends in your 120. Because of course, since 120 is bigger, the odds of you having a bend or warp in the negative as it's on there are much higher, which of course goes back to the whole being out of focus and half of your image being in focus, all that kind of stuff. So these have worked well for me, but they have not been my favorite, just because it requires so much back and forth and cutting your negatives and then placing it on the slides again and making sure your focus is in check and then adjusting it, and then you have to crop every single image. It just creates a lot of work. So I'm going away from these. So this is a piece of 3D printed plastic. This is a film holder off of Thingiverse. There are several different options from very basic up to more sophisticated that you can print to scan your film. This is great because I just insert my film on one side, pull it out the other side. I can set this underneath the camera, and I can take all 36 shots right in a row, and then I can crop it, adjust it, and then duplicate that to the other 35 images. No cutting, no adjustments, nothing. I know the focus is going to be the same on every one, the position is going to be the same on every one. It makes the process so much faster. And then there's another one for 120. This, of course, being medium format. So again, same exact concept. I don't have to cut my negatives. I don't have to do any of that. I just slide it through here, scan it, done. The downside to this one is it is just for 6x7. Obviously it works for square, but if you have 6x9 or anything like that, it's not going to work. But if you're doing something that big, you're probably going to end up stitching the images and taking, multiple shots with your camera and putting those all together, just because you want that resolution out of a medium format image. That's kind of the whole reason you shoot medium format. So you still have to take multiple images, but it does still make it easier than trying to cut everything down to size on this and figuring out whether you can fit 2 shots in here or 1 shot or 3, depending on the format, and then trying to catalog those in your folders. It just creates a nightmare. Now, I don't have a 3D printer. A buddy of mine printed these for me, and they were printed in white, but of course I spray painted them black. So of course, if you don't have a 3D printer either, but if you know someone who has, maybe they can print these out for you. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure you can go onto Facebook Marketplace or eBay or really anywhere and find people who will print things for you and ship it to you. You just send them the file, they print it, and you're done. So I have used this already, and it's just been awesome, been a huge lifesaver. Now, it is important that you keep these in a dark or black color. Why? Because you don't want external light coming to your film. So when you're DSLR scanning, you want to make sure lights are off if possible, or you isolate the light as much as possible so that it's only coming into your camera through the negative. Reason being, if you have light coming in from other angles, or maybe the pad, if you have light coming in from the entire pad, you don't have it blocked off or anything, your image is going to get kind of fadey, and you get kind of a pro-mist look because light's coming in from all these different angles instead of just the source that you want it to. Now, maybe you have a little bit of extra cash, maybe you want to buy a little bit more of an upgraded system. There's a few different options out there. Of course, Negative Supply, they have a few different price ranging options from small to more robust, with lights, without lights, all that kind of stuff, which is great because you can kind of pick and choose what fits your budget. Another one is the Essential Film Holder, which is another option for scanning your film. Also great, different than negative feedback in little ways, but also very similar. There's also one called Valio, which is a little bit more budget friendly than Negative Supply. Different company. Again, I haven't tested any of these personally. And then lastly, one that's a little bit different is the Nikon ES2 film scanner. So this one's different because it actually mounts to the Nikon macro lens. So I'm not sure what all the lenses it works with. I think it's mainly just for, of course, Nikon. But this is nice because it straps straight under your camera, so you don't have to worry about leveling it out. It's mounted to the camera, so it's going to be level. You just have to worry about the light source, but then also you don't have to worry about shake or anything like that. So it does have a lot of pros, but I think it's kind of limited as far as what cameras, lens systems you can use it on. So that wraps up what I use for my DSLR film scanning setup. If you have any questions, be sure to leave those in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Again, this is just my setup. I'm not saying it's perfect. It can definitely be improved, but again, it's depending on what your budget is, what you're trying to get, how much work and effort you want to put into it, and the results you're wanting. For me, this works now. I'm still fine-tuning and figure out what I want to do for my permanent setup, but I'm still getting great results with this. This is rather cost-effective and budget-friendly. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.